Hello everyone, this is Mr. Miles. This is a video I'm going to record for you guys. For anyone who missed Monday, the 9th of August, the notes we took that day. So this is a kind of quick synopsis, overview of the notes that we took on Monday. So if you need to catch up, if you need to get a rundown of what you need to know, this video will do that for you. Okay? So without any further ado, let's talk about what our first unit is. So our first unit is Native American and colonial America. So we're going to be reading a lot of Native American and colonial settler works. We're going to start with Native Americans. So we need to talk about why Native American literature is something that we need to start off with. Why not just start with the colonists? Well, if you look at history, Native Americans have been here for about 12,000 to 70,000 years already on this continent. So it would be kind of like starting a football game with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. We're really late comers to this continent, and the Native Americans have been here a while. So we need to start by talking about them, talking about the stories that they told each other and they passed down from their generation to generation, and just talking about how those stories impacted the colonists and American literature further on down the road. So that's why it's important, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so first thing you need to know is the Native Americans came across a land bridge from Siberia in Asia. It was an ice bridge that they managed to cross, and then they came to North America and stayed there. As I said earlier, they've been sitting here about 12,000 to 70,000 years before any Europeans showed up. So that means they've been here at least 30 times longer than any European. Okay, so when Europeans come and they say that this is the new world, they're not actually looking at a new world, because the Native Americans, they have been here for thousands of years. Okay, so let's talk about Christopher Columbus, the first contact between Europeans and Native Americans. As you can see from this photo, or this picture, Christopher Columbus is in the center. He's depicted as kneeling, showing his face to the sky, sort of indicating that he is receiving God's blessing. It's interesting, in one hand he has the flag of Spain, and in the other he has a sword, which may symbolize that he is claiming this land for Spain and for Christianity, because if you look on the left, this guy is a priest, and he is blessing some natives over here. So this kind of exemplifies how the Europeans viewed themselves coming across the ocean and interacting with the natives. They sort of saw themselves as liberators of the natives from their primitive way of life, enlightening them and giving them all sorts of beautiful rewards of civilization. But they also viewed the natives as an inferior and primitive and savage, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So originally Columbus came to America thinking he was going to India. He thought he was going to sail west and find India quicker than having to go down the Silk Road. He did not find India, though he thought he did at first. So that's why it's called the West Indies nowadays. He landed in the Bahamas, and he called the people that he found Indians because he thought they were from India. There's another picture of Columbus, again with the sword, the flag of Spain, his face looking up toward the sky, receiving God's blessing. But when you have these two cultures, you have to understand that there is a clash of cultures. You have to understand there is a sort of disconnect between the Europeans and the way they saw the world and the Native Americans and the way they viewed the world. Their religion, their customs, their traditions, and so on. So with this term clash of cultures, we have to understand all the different ways that the Europeans and the Native Americans were different from each other. Europeans were Christian for the most part. Native Americans, every single tribe had their own belief system, but none of them were Christian. And so there was conflict there right off the bat. The Europeans wanted the natives to have dress like them, have armor, have clothing like them, have modern weapons, gunpowder weapons, and the natives maybe wanted to stick more to their normal way of life. So there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of tension between the two when they met. Native Americans, with some exceptions, greeted the European settlers as equals. What do I mean by that? Well, that means that when the Europeans showed up on their beaches, the Native Americans wanted to trade with them right off the bat, thought they would be getting fair deals from the Europeans. The Europeans realized very quickly that they could take advantage of the natives and decided that that's what they were going to do. So they would give them things like glass beads, which weren't very valuable, in return for some very valuable items that the natives had, whether that's furs or spices or just things that for the Europeans were incredibly valuable. They gave the Native Americans junk and said, ooh, yeah, this is a fair trade. So while the Native Americans viewed them as equals, the Europeans did not. Okay, so the main reasons the Europeans eventually, after Columbus, decided to start coming to the New World is because of gold, glory, and God. Gold, because there were just so many untapped riches and resources over here. The Europeans thought they could get rich quick. And they also spread rumors of like cities of gold and things like that. So it really enticed a lot of Europeans to come over. Kind of going hand in hand with that, there's glory as well. A lot of Europeans who were like very adventurous thought they could make a name for themselves in the New World, so they came over for that reason, to either make themselves famous or glorify their country, claim new land for their country. So glory is another part of it. And then God. A lot of Europeans came over for religious reasons, whether that's to convert the Native Americans, who they saw as one giant mission field, or to flee from persecution, because Europe was going through a lot of religious wars at this time. So a lot of Christians who were, maybe their sect was being persecuted, they fled across the ocean for safety because they wanted to worship in peace. And that means that a lot of Native Americans who rejected Christianity, they were considered enemies of God. And so a lot of Native Americans who said, I don't want to be baptized or I don't want to be converted, they were brought back to Europe and taught Spanish or English and kind of forced into a European sort of civilization lifestyle. And so those who were brought over back to Europe, they didn't really have much say in the matter. So whether you want to term that as slavery or not, it definitely did not seek the Native Americans' permission first in terms of whether they went or not. So there was an issue with that as well. Okay, Eurocentrism. Eurocentrism is the belief that Europeans, people or European descended people, are the center of the world. So if you ever had a parent tell you the world doesn't revolve around you, well, it's a very similar concept to that, but let's just apply it to a whole group of people. Basically, it's when the Europeans believed that their civilization, their way of life, their religion, their norms, their way of doing things was better than everybody else's. And so they viewed that, the way the natives did things, as inferior and uncivilized, and they thought that it was just a bunch of savages and primitive people making cave paintings and stuff, and just a cartoonish kind of depiction of the way the Native Americans really were. But the Europeans said, okay, this is not the way we need to do things. We need to teach them to dress like us, worship like us, talk like us, and then they'll be better. So that's what Eurocentrism is. Okay. When people talk about what happened to the Native Americans when there were so many of them before the Europeans showed up, basically the main thing that happened was disease. The Native Americans did not have immunity to the diseases that the Europeans brought with them. Native Americans did not really have a way of fighting any of the diseases that the Europeans brought. So we didn't have vaccines in this time period, so vaccine and measles and cholera, those basically wiped out a very large portion of Native American population. More than 50 million in the span of about a century, between 1492 and the 1600s. So if that kind of gives you an idea of just how much the disease wiped out Native Americans, that gives you a good picture of it. Other important things, again, we mentioned enslavement, being brought back to Europe against their will. We also need to talk about war. The Europeans had a distinct advantage in warfare against the Native Americans. Specifically, they had gunpowder weapons. The Native Americans had bows and arrows. So technologically, the advantage was with the Europeans. It didn't matter if there were 5,000 Native Americans against 500 Europeans if the Europeans all had rifles. So it was just one of those situations where the technology difference between the two groups of people really played a role in making the other group of people subject. So what does it mean to turn something into an exotic other? Well, the exotic other is when you take somebody, some group of people, and you exoticize it. Okay? Now, to exoticize something means to treat something like, let's talk about an exotic soap, right? It's foreign. It smells different. It looks different, right? Well, an exotic person is somebody who looks different, dresses different, talks different, does weird things that are just odd to us, right? Well, it's treating a group of people or a person like a freak show in a circus. We're not really showing them respect. Yeah, they're fascinating, but we're fascinated because they're so weird and different from us, right? That's what it means to turn the natives into an exotic other, okay? And this is the last thing, the noble savage, okay? So the noble savage is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. So a lot of Europeans viewed natives as savage, barbaric, primitive, animalistic. But the noble savage is kind of the polar opposite of that, where, yes, we still view them as uncivilized and all that, but they live at one with nature. They are peaceful people. They just pass the peace pipe around. They have no conflict. They live in harmony with the environment and all this stuff, where we just kind of romanticize the Native American people instead of treating them like an actual group of human beings who have flaws, who have shortcomings just like everybody else. So that's what the noble savage represents. Okay? So this is the PowerPoint that we did our notes on. Those are essentially the highlights of it. I'll post this PowerPoint on Google Classroom so you can see more of it if you want to go back and refer to it later. But that's just me kind of explaining a little bit what each of these terms means. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. All right, y'all have a good day.